should go ahead and get started. I'll just say a quick hello and introduction and then hand it over to our special guests and host today, Whitney Owens and Hunter Bickers. So let me start by saying welcome. Thank you all for joining. We periodically have these webinars with the Practice Vital and Beyond community. So really appreciate people coming out. Great chance to learn from one another and just share tips, tricks, ideas, strategies for how we're using the tool, but also how we're just innately growing our practices based on the many resources we all have available. So our hosts, like I mentioned, are Whitney Owens, who is a owner of a practice in Savannah, Georgia, owner of Water's Edge Counseling, as well as a consultant and founder of the Wise Practice Consulting Group. Many of you, I think, are familiar, but I'm sure some new people may be catching wind of it as we get to know each other. And she's joined with her clinical manager, Hunter, from Water's Edge Counseling as well. And we've worked with Whitney and Hunter and their team for a little over a year now, I think, which is hard to believe, kind of flies by. And she and her team are just fabulous examples of a practice that are really leaning into their data and putting it to use in a meaningful, smart way within their day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month practices within their group. So we thought it would be a great occasion to really hear from an outside group like these two to really tell us about what they're doing, how they're finding success in some of those rituals that they're creating within their team environment, and hopefully leave you all with some great advice and strategies to take back to your own teams as well. So with that, thank you again for joining us, and can't wait to learn a bit from you all. I am recording the session and we will share it with the group afterwards if anyone wants to double back to anything. And I'll keep a light eye on the chat as well if people have questions as we go. But we can always save those for the end if we have a few minutes, if that's easiest. So great, take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for the lovely introduction. And I can't believe it's been a year. It actually feels longer than that. I feel like we're in this every day. So I feel like Practice Vital is like a part of our practice experience at Water's Edge Counseling. So recently, when I was kind of putting some things together, I thought, gosh, like it is hard to know how do we utilize Practice Vital and the different facets of it. And so I was like, hey, I reached out to the ladies, said, would you like us to do a webinar? And then I was like, what am I doing? Hunter's the expert on this, so I'm going to bring him in too. And so that's kind of why we're tag teaming it in this webinar today. So the first part, I'm going to share a little bit and I have a little slideshow that I'm going to go through just some quick information with you. And then after that, Hunter's going to take over and actually show you our Practice Vital. So no judgment, okay? But he's going to actually show us our practice numbers. Some are great, some are not so great. And then kind of go through how we look at it and how we use that data to move forward as a practice. So I thank you for watching the chat, and I will kind of do the same as well, especially as Hunter's going through data. But for now, I would love for y'all to just throw in the chat as we're getting to know each other, like how are you using Practice Vital? And then what kind of questions would you love? Like if you could pick one thing that we tell you today on how to best use the software, throw that in the chat, and then we can kind of look at that as well. So all right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. So give me just a second as I still navigate how to pull up my screen appropriately. All right, so just to confirm, just want to make sure y'all are seeing my screen before okay, good. I love the thumbs up. That's perfect. Okay. So how to use your practice data, improve your processes and revenue. Here's my name, Hunter's name, our contact information. And again, I can give you that at the end after the presentation in case you have follow-up questions or things that you want to ask us about. But I always like knowing a little bit about the presenters. Why do they know what they're talking about? So like I was introduced, own Water's Edge Counseling. We have two locations, one in Savannah, which is right here on the coast of Georgia, and then one on Wilmington Island, which is even closer to the coast of Georgia. Each location is about 20 minutes away from each other. We have 15 plus therapists, private pay practice, And like I said, we use Practice Vital every single day in our practice. And it's collecting some solid data. Before Practice Vital, I spent so much time tracking things by hand and I did it wrong. And then I got Practice Vital and I was like, dang, I didn't know what I was doing. So I love now that I have a software that tracks it correctly because human error definitely comes into play. And I can spend my time doing a lot of other things that I would rather be doing than math. So here are some of the data points. Like when Hunter and I sat down, and we were like, okay, what are the things that we track the most with Practice Vital? These are the things: churn ratio, retention ratio, billable cancellations, completed sessions per therapist, completed sessions compared to the previous year, supervisor metrics, and average number of sessions per client, per therapist, and the practice as a whole. So the slides I have for you are going to be on churn ratio because this was the first thing that we grabbed onto, and we've worked really hard on improving it in the practice, which has happened with the thankfulness of Practice Vital. So it has gotten better. And then we're going to go into some of these other things right here. Now, in case you aren't sure, I just want to make sure we break this down because it can get a little confusing. Churn ratio is churning out clients. So getting them out of the practice, which is not what we want. We want that in percentage to be low. Retention is kind of the opposite in the sense of we want that to be high. It's the ability to retain clients. When we talk about churn, we're talking until session 4. So someone's churn ratio is how many clients they're churning out, getting rid of before they hit session 4. Retention is how many clients they're keeping to session 8. So we want that percentage high. So as a practice, we felt like let's focus on this first number and get everybody in a good zone, and then we can look at retention. So that is what we've been focused on. We introduced Practice Vital to the staff. I think it was in November, October, November. At first, it was a challenge, but it's gotten better with time as people have gotten more used to it. You know, therapists aren't used to having numbers put in front of them. So that's what we've been working on. So our goal is to improve the client retention to better support outcomes for clients. I think it's so important with our team, and I think this is on the next slide. So it's really important that we're not just saying, hey, I want your number to be at this because I want to make more money. And yes, I do want to make more money and I do want the practice to do well, but we know that we're really in this not for money, but client care. I could have done a lot of other things to make a lot more money with my life. I like to introduce it to people, new team members, current team members of it's not about, hey, you did this right or wrong or this money or not. If clients don't make it to session 4, research makes that pretty clear that they did not have a good clinical experience. And we are here to help clients get better. So when we present it that way to our team, it really takes some of that pressure off of focusing on the numbers and they're focusing more on the client care. And so we have a whole presentation that we give to our team at the onboarding phase. It's a whole hour on why churn matters, what the research is telling us, and how we can have best outcomes with our clients. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. It's a whole nother presentation that I can give on what are the ways that we can help clients get to session 4. So we want to frame this conversation around client success and building buy-in for therapists that they kind of are coming on board and saying, "Hey, I want my numbers to get better, and this is why I want my numbers to get better." So another important thing to be thinking about when you're presenting Practice Vital or whatever it is that you're going to track in your practice, you're going to set that team culture of we're doing this together. This is to help you. This is to help the practice. This is to help our clients. You know, it's for the overall betterment of everyone. So we want to set that tone sooner rather than later. So we are talking about this in the interview process because we want them to be thinking about that. I actually had Tori come and do a presentation for the Wise Practice community. I think that actually was back in November last year, sometime around then. And one of the things she talked about that really stuck out to me was once the numbers are at a certain place, it's hard to come back. And when you hire somebody, you know, that 90-day mark, that's a pretty good indicator of how they're going to go. And I see you saying yes. So I'm saying your words correctly, it sounds like. But that really spoke to me. And I thought, gosh, like I want to track that at 90 days because I want people to be set up for success. And then if I talk about that in the interview process, I think that's going to make it even better because then we're not surprising people at 90 days of, hey, I expect your churn to be this percentage at, 90 days. And if they don't know that at the beginning, you're going to freak them out, because like, again, we went into this not because of data, because of client care. And so a lot of therapists aren't thinking about those things. The competitive nature is not there the way it is for us as practice owners. So we want to be talking about that in advance. So we are introducing churn ratio in the interview process. We're letting them know the importance of tracking data, why we track data, and we also let them know what data we're looking for. Now, I assume you can probably change this in your practice vital, but this was the setting that was there for us is the 40% setting. So 40% or higher is the red zone. I think is that for everybody or can you change that?
It's built in and you can change it. I've thought since we have more data now that that seems high, and for my practice I've lowered it quite a bit. But yes, for churn we say that red is above 40%. I still think above 30% should be red for all
Oh,
practices. But yes.
well, I like the feedback and I've got a lot of work to do. But we'll get there. So that's where we sit. And so we let our team members know that we are looking at churn ratio at 40% or less. And at your 90-day review, by then you've got enough time has passed and you can change all these settings in your practice vital. But by that time, we have enough data that has been collected to get a good idea of where you sit with that. And then again, we're emphasizing the support metric of that, not in policing it. So practice standards and tracking. So we're talking about churn in the interview process. We talk about it at the 90-day process, and then we want to keep that below 40%. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, we've got this stuff going on in our practice too, but boy, what do I do when it's not really going the way it needs to go, right? How do I talk to my staff and implement things? So these are the things that we do with our team members that are helping. If a therapist churn is over 40%, they have weekly meetings with the clinical manager to work on it. This was something in my own coaching a couple of years ago. It was a different issue, but my coach said to me, Whitney, why are you not talking about this issue with your staff more? And I was like, well, I've already said it enough and I'm really tired of talking about it. And he was like, the very thing that needs to change in your practice is the thing you should be talking about all the time until it changes. It was almost like I wanted change without having to deal with it. And so if churn is high, which as y'all know, this is one of the biggest money losses in your practice is when you're losing clients that you've already paid lots of money to obtain. You could go do some research on how much it costs in your practice to obtain a client, but it's pretty significant. Even in our practice, they need to come at least 4 to 6 sessions to just cover the cost of getting that client in the door. That's if we're just looking at money, right? Of course, we're really looking at client care above that. But one of the ways that we can greatly improve is by doing more training. And so we meet with them every single week to improve it. So we're talking about it, we're training about it. So we start looking at trends. For example, we have one therapist, we were talking about her yesterday. She's so experienced, great clinician, but boy, her couples retention or churn is terrible. It's at like 70%. Okay, really not good. We have some ideas as to what that is, and we're going to continue to meet with her, and we already are meeting with her about that. But the good thing is I used this data and said, hey, like your individual churn is so much better than your couples. We're not going to have you see couples anymore. Then we had the opposite, where we had a girl that we hired and she had never worked with couples. She only had experience really working with kids and teens, and boy, she's killing it with couples. So we're giving her all the couples. So this one simple thing has made a big difference in the practice. I had one therapist who got her numbers and was like, "Ooh, I want to understand this." Like she was really competitive about it, and so she pulled up all of her clients. She printed out in therapy notes, and she went through and looked at the ones that had left before 4 sessions and the ones that had stayed a long time. She was able to find out that trauma is really her thing. And then she actually just recently got EMDR trained. So that's really cool and exciting. And so now she's noticing, hey, I have this trend. It doesn't mean that we don't give them other clients, but we really try to hone in on the clients that they are doing really well with. And this is showing us that data. It helps us with understanding weekly scheduling and who to schedule who with, addressing mindset issues such as private pay and one's worth. So we had another clinician who had some pretty bad churn. She lost 8 of her first 9 clients that she got assigned. So that was like, what's going on here? And so by meeting with her, we were able to find out she didn't feel comfortable talking about money with clients. She didn't feel comfortable telling them to come every week. She felt like clients should determine when they come in. And I was like, no, you're the expert here. Like, you need to tell them that you want to see them and when to come in so that you can meet treatment goals and those kind of things. And so some of her money mindset stuff and some of her own confidence issues actually came out by reviewing her numbers and looking at churn ratio. So that was really helpful for her for the practice. All right. So in addition to overall churn ratio, we also look at the following. We look at the previous quarter's numbers compared to see how improvement can be happening. So that could be lots of different things, but trying to look at how to make those improvements. The direction of churn for each clinician is based on the most recent intakes, making it to at least 4 sessions. So we do use the data and Practice Vital. Sometimes if we're in a specific situation, maybe someone's on a performance improvement plan to improve their numbers. At times like, oh, are y'all still seeing my screen? I hit something. You're still seeing my screen? Yeah. Okay. All right. No, I'm
We
sorry.
see your screen. The presentation came down.
There. Okay, here we
There
are.
we go.
Whew, okay, thank you. All right. I got lost. Oh, anyway, so sometimes I got it. Okay, so sometimes we track things by hand. If we have somebody on a performance improvement plan and we're trying to track things faster, we'll do that by hand and also use the software to be able to do that. And there's some other really cool graph features that we look at. I don't know if you go further into it, Hunter can show you all this, but there are graph features that will show you what somebody's ratio is within certain months. So that's really cool to look at, like, okay, did their churn do worse when they had more intakes, or did their churn do worse because this was the month they took vacation, or because they were having some personal stuff this month? So it's nice to be able to not just look at the one number, but you can really dive into each one and what it looks like for that data. And then, like I said, sometimes we have to put people on a behavioral plan, and we have a whole policy for, we correct it with an individual meeting, we send them an email, we create a behavioral plan. You have to have your churn by this date, and it's for us to be able to assist and help them. So I think that's it. I think I'm gonna stop this here. All right. So I'm gonna have Hunter take over in just a second, but were there any questions that came up about churn to answer before I keep going? I know you were looking at the.
None specific to churn just yet. I do see Suzanne raising a hand. You want to chime in?
Yes, I was just wondering if you have seen clinicians be able to really make a difference in their churn rate, and how long does it take? What is realistic?
When you say make a real difference, what is that number to you?
Have it, oh well. That's a good question. Like how much can you expect in 1 month? Can you expect it to go down?
I think, well, a couple
You
of
know,
factors here. It can improve up
yeah,
and down a percentage or two. The less clients they see, the more impact the clients have.
on their churn rate.
Right, right. So if you were to see that, like, a therapist were to get 5 new clients and they only have a caseload of 20, then those 5 clients, if they retain all of them, will make a pretty big dent in their percentage. But if you have someone with a higher caseload, it's going to make less of a dent if they keep them or don't keep them.
So
So
you
that's a
have to dig in more to the actual numbers sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do see that some of our therapists have improved, like that were below or above 40% when we started, have made the improvements. So not all of them have, but a lot of them have, and the overall percentage for the practice has improved as well for churn ever since we started talking about it more and implementing it.
I'll go into a little bit too of how I can project where somebody's churn rate is heading before the practice vital data officially reflects it. Because sometimes, right, with lower intakes, if somebody doesn't see a lot of clients, the churn is just going to be more volatile. But if you have a clinician who sees a lot of people, and since we tend to look at over the course of 12 months, it can take a lot for that percentage to move up or down. And then so I can go and look at people's intakes slash also look at who is potentially going to fall off of that data that Practice Vital is tracking. And I can kind of speak with that clinician and let them know, okay, it's heading down or it's heading up based on a few different factors.
All right.
I can share real quick that I was just looking at my numbers in here, and this is why it's really handy to be able to click from year to year. But 2022 pre-Practice Vital for my practice as a whole, our churn rate was 22%. 2023, we had Practice Vital for part of the year, and I was aware of it then at that point and started to use it, and our churn was 18%. 2024, it was 11%. This year it's 8%. So we've gone from 22% to 8%, and I would credit that 100% to Practice Vital. I mean, really just for knowing the numbers and then doing something about it. So we've seen the same increase in profitability based on those numbers.
You're killing it. I'm like, whoa. All right, Hunter, you ready?
Yeah. All right. I will take it away. And just so you all know a little bit about me as well. So prior to taking over the clinical operations at Water's Edge, I was a full-time clinician for several years. So I got the info when we implemented Practice Vital, but to me there were just some statistics. And then once I got in here, ultimately a lot of what I did was click a lot of buttons and see a lot of numbers and look at them long enough to where they started to tell me some things. And then since then, I've just explored more and I've found more things that I've been able to use over the past several months. And there's even a few things I haven't been able to dive into yet on Practice Vital that I plan to see if I can extrapolate some good info from. But essentially, what I'm going to do here today is I'm just going to go line by line, essentially, of what I look at on a weekly or even daily basis with some things. And I'll just start with each heading and just kind of walk you all through what I'm looking at, what I'm thinking as I'm looking at different figures and statistics, and along with some of the things Whitney touched on, how we as a practice can make some decisions or implement policy changes, so on and so forth, or communicate to staff based on what we're seeing through here. So when I go over to, can everybody see my screen, by the way?
Yes.
The classic Zoom line. Can you see my screen? All right. So moving over to the dashboard, move you all real quick. So one thing, I don't pay a lot of attention to these two, active clients and rebook rate, mainly just because we consistently have some clients between all the clinicians we have, we consistently have some people that need some discharge summaries. But the first thing that I'm going to look at are our weekly bookings. That's going to give me a good snapshot of the next couple of weeks and where we're heading and how the month overall is going to look. And then I can also weigh that against our weekly average over the past 12 months. So at 258, that's looking fairly standard for us for this time of year. And then also I can see a number like 179 for next week. And that's actually a bit of a signal for me to take a deeper dive into what next week looks like, because on a Tuesday, the week prior, that's actually a little low. And then so what I did just yesterday actually was went into some calendars for next week to take a peek and see what was going on. I completely forgot that Monday was Labor Day. And that 100% explains why that number is low. So that makes sense. But typically I would want to see this in the 200s, and typically it is. But I can use just this little snapshot to give me an idea of where the month is heading. Total overdue notes, that's high. We had a clinician that went out of town and has some catch up to do. I typically have a good idea of where that number should lie. Every now and then there's going to be a late note or two that just happens with life and all the sessions that our clinicians have. But what it does allow me to do is I can actually dive in, look and see what the sessions were. Sometimes a note just slips through the cracks, or that will also alert us if there's a particular issue with any of our clinicians with getting some notes taken care of on time. The next thing I'm going to look at is this very briefly. Usually I just use these numbers, the completed sessions over the past 12 months and the average and the client scene. What I'll do on occasion is just so I can compare how we're doing this year over last year, I'll use the date filtering option just to kind of look and see how we're doing, what the rate of increase is overall. I don't often spend a ton of time on that. This is something I might look at once per month to filter out some dates and kind of take a look and see how we're doing. But what I'll spend more time on is our practice completed sessions over time. So this is where I'll really get a good snapshot of how we're doing year over year. So, and then as you can see, we have a pretty typical flow. I'm sure it might work pretty similar with the rest of you that our busy season kind of revolves around the school year. So once we start getting into September and October, things will increase. Then we have the holiday season, and then the school semester starts again and will steadily increase. And then the summer is going to be a little bit slower, vacations and so on and so forth. But what I'll also do is I will take a deeper dive and I will filter this so I can actually look at previous months and go from June of last year to the end of this month, just to give me a snapshot again of how are other months looking compared to the year prior so I can track growth of the practice. So as we can see, right, we still have time left in August, and this is lagging behind a few more days. So we're on pace to beat August, and then June and July of last year, we were able to increase those numbers as well. So then that can also give me an idea of if June and July were here last year, and then September and October were here, then I might can actually have a good idea if June or July are here this year, where September and October are going to be. So that's just giving me a good idea of how things are going to look moving down the line. One thing I'll also take a quick peek at as well, just comparing our numbers by location. So our Savannah location is going to be much heavier in terms of weekly average and completed sessions. We just opened our Wilmington location back in February, but I'll get a good idea of how some of these statistics line up by group. And the same thing with our supervisors. So I can look at trends. Which supervision group might be performing the best? What is that supervisor doing or saying? How are they working with their supervisees? And that way they can share that info with the other supervisors of how they're able to help, what kind of content they're discussing in their supervision meetings, et cetera. And I won't get into metric reports just yet, but we will get there shortly. The next thing I'll dive into, and I will look at these just about daily, sometimes weekly, just depending. And so, as I'm sure most of you have seen as well, this is going to give us a good snapshot of each of our individual clinicians' statistics. And then I'll just run down and take a look at everybody. Now it does change, as I'm sure some of you notice, that things will change maybe by a percentage point or two, just as we have the ebbs and flows, especially since we're looking at 12 months in total. So naturally, with every day, there are clients from over 12 months that are falling off of this tracking. And then there are also new clients that are getting added into it. So one thing I do each week, every Monday morning, I will log all of these so I can have a good idea of how they're trending over time. And that way I can remember, oh, was it 16 last week or was it 18 with Abby? And keep track of everything that way. And I'll run through, we'll take a look at utilization as well. Amanda's our intern, so she only sees a few people, and just kind of go all the way through everybody, take a look and see what some of the flags are, anything I need to address. And then, like, so for example, Lisa, who Whitney just mentioned a little bit ago. So for months on end, Lisa had a churn rate under 40%. And then when we see a number like this pop up, well, then we know we need to take a deeper dive and see what's going on with Lisa. And then when I took said deeper dive, that's when we came to find out that Lisa has struggled ever since she began taking on couples. And then looking through all the other clients can determine like, okay, well, Lisa's been doing pretty all right as she always has with individuals. So the introduction of couples into her caseload has caused this to rise. Therefore, we can make decisions as a practice to shift couples that call to other clinicians who tend to be doing better with them. Let's see. And then as Lisa mentioned as well, we will look at things on different time scales as well. So like going into Abby, for example, if I wanted to get a better look too, we could go by quarters and we can take a look at things and see how people have looked over the past couple of months, get a deeper dive. I really only do that if we have somebody that is a little bit more close to that 40% range. Somebody like Abby, for example, there's really not a whole lot to look at with her. She tends to do very well with people and keeps clients very well. But so somebody like, where is she? Somebody like Cami, who's hovering right around 41%. Cami actually, over the past couple of months, has done very well, and her churn rate is below 40. And I've been able to find that just through taking a deeper dive into her numbers as well. But the last half of last year was a bit of a struggle for her. And so that we can find that that kind of brings her numbers up. But over the past couple of months, I know that she's been doing much better. So then that can also influence my discussions with her. And then again, we can have a better sense of how things are going, what clients are working with her. Her Kami's schedule has changed a little bit. She's seen a bit fewer clients, which has also helped her numbers. And so with each individual person, we can take a look at these numbers and go deeper if we need to get a better idea of how things are looking and where things are going. And another thing I'll actually look at with our individual clinicians through this page is our billable cancellations. So we have a 24-hour policy at Water's Edge. If somebody cancels within 24 hours, we charge a full fee of the session. Now, at the same time, our clinicians have some discretionary power if somebody experiences some sort of emergency or some extenuating circumstance. Our clinicians have the ability to not charge that person. So one thing I want to look at is comparing clinicians, and I do that by looking at how many sessions or so they've completed over the past 12 months. So I can see Abby and Amanda have fairly similar numbers over the course of the past year. And then so what I can do is I can go and look and see over the past 12 months. And what I'll do here is I will just make this compact. Take that back. I will look at billable cancellations right here. And I'll go and I'll take a look. And so I can see that there's been a total of 58 for the past 12 months. And so what then I'll do is I'll find another clinician that has seen a similar number of clients. I get into a real world example here because I had this conversation. And then I'm going to go into Amanda and see that over the course of the past 12 months, Amanda only charged 21 people for a cancellation. So then seeing that, that leads to a conversation between Amanda and I, and where I simply explore with her, what's your process? What do you do? How do you determine who you charge that fee for or not? And as it comes to find out, Amanda's kind of her rules and following on the policy of Water's Edge was no different than anybody else's. But we also do come to find out is that since Amanda does work a lot with children, most of the people she deals with are parents who are going to be a little bit more responsible on average than some other individual clients. And Amanda also does a very good job of texting clients beforehand and throughout the week to remind them of their appointments. Therefore, she just simply does not have the opportunity to charge people for a late cancellation as often as other people. But we never know that if we don't look at these numbers. So doing these, we can find out if something's off, and maybe in this example, there's nothing off. Amanda just has a very good process that ensures that people show up to sessions more often than other clinicians might experience. Next, I want us to take a look at some of the reports. So I'll look at the completed sessions report once a week, but again, I'm just doing that to get an idea of how everybody's looking. And I usually do this on a week by week basis. So I'll go in and filter this out.
One thing, well, if you don't mind, Hunter, may I
Yeah,
point one thing out while you're in the completed
sure.
sessions report? Since you were just speaking of billable cancels, which you all track within completed sessions, I just wanted to highlight that if you scroll down, instead of going back and forth between clinicians, you can see, and I can show you after your time frame, but you can see each clinician in line with one another and the number of billable cancels in the table there. So that's just another way, again, instead of going back and forth between clinicians individually, you can also see that line item broken out there for the billable cancels.
Great, thank you.
Because that's one of the questions here. Someone's asking if we set that up separately. That was part of Practice Vital. It was already in there, wasn't it? It's tracking it from therapy notes when we do it.
Yep, it depends on how you choose in your onboarding and configuring of the tool how to track cancellations. You all have it set up how we default to setting it up where billable cancels are counted as the completed session in the completed sessions bucket. Some practices, if you're not seeing it there, maybe your practice onboarding involved asking us to move it into the cancel bucket. We can work one-on-one with any practices. If you're not seeing it in there and want to be counting those cancels differently, we can work together on that. It is a little bit nuanced depending on the EHR that you're using. But like I said, we default to setting up billable cancels within that completed sessions bucket as you guys have it set up.
Thank you.
I'll also add too, and I forgot to mention this, one thing in me looking at billable cancellations and comparing numbers, I was able to, I guess, quell a lot of clinician anxiety because I know a lot of people can become worried, like, oh my gosh, if I charge this person, then they're just never going to come back. And diving into all of our personal numbers, I was really able to find there's absolutely no correlation between a high number of billable cancellations and a high churn rate. In fact, she's actually since moved to a different state now, but our clinician who arguably consistently had the best churn rate by far charged the most billable cancellations. And so we've actually seen quite the opposite. We've had clinicians that have had worse churn rates that were more hesitant to charge for billable cancellations. And that goes into further discussions we can have with clinicians about, as Whitney mentioned, boundaries and being the expert in the room and setting expectations. And so just using that and being able to dive into these numbers helped us to really reinforce, like, hey guys, just so you know, if you do charge people, there really is no evidence to support that they're not going to come back. So it is okay to fall back on our policy. And also for addressing churn rates with clinicians, also informing them that if somebody does cancel late and there is no plausible excuse or some extenuating circumstance, that does help your churn rate overall because that does count as a completed session. So getting back to this, so I'll take a peek at this once a week just to get a good idea of how many sessions people are completing. And I log all of this as well just to track that over time and see how people are doing. And what I spend a lot of time in is actually the retention report over here. And so we are able to see retention over time. And I will tend to, and you can filter all of this out for your retention threshold. Naturally, the term retention is usually associated with 8, but we can move it to 4, 2, 6, whatever would work for you. And then we have the ability to look at graphs over time. And so this is looking at Water's Edge as a whole. And I will also note that when looking at this for your practice, your last 2 months are going to consistently be kind of low just because there hasn't been time for that to get bumped up by people coming back to reaching those sessions just yet. So if you're looking at your practice or looking at a particular clinician, don't let these freak you out at all. Just understand that they are going to come up just with time. We notice that it takes to come up a little bit. But what I'll do is I will take a look specifically at certain clinicians through all of this in order to see where their churn rate might be heading. So we'll just pull Abby back up, for example. And so we can kind of take a look at Abby's graph here too. And overall, Abby does, as I mentioned, very, very well. And then we kind of look, and she typically has a low number of intakes because she keeps a lot of clients. So there's just not a whole lot of space often for her to have them. But what I'll do for clinicians is I'll go down here to the compact and I'll go to view clients. And this actually moves us over into the data report section, but I get there through the retention port. And then, so I will filter into the last 12 months and I will click intake. So it starts at the earliest from where the data starts tracking. And then I'll have an idea who was retained. So who had 8 sessions, who didn't make it to 4, and between who's sitting between 4 and 8. And then so I can look and go all the way down. And then I'll also see all of this data here that has not factored into the statistic with her churn rate just yet. And so what I'll do is I could sit down with Abby and say, okay, well, in early September, these clients are going to fall off of your churn rate as we track it for the past 12 months. So we know that these are going to go away, but we can look at these and get an idea of what the data has yet to come with your statistic. And I can slide over here and see how many sessions these people had. So I know I can count like this person did not churn. This person does not have a current appointment scheduled. So maybe they might come back on, but maybe they might not. So at this point in time, they've had 2 sessions. They do not have one scheduled. Maybe we can assume that this client is going to count as a churned client. Their last appointment was on June 23rd. And then so we can go all the way down and see, like, we know they didn't churn, they didn't churn, they didn't churn. They probably will have churned. And then so we can use this info too to determine, okay, well, it looks like your churn data is going to move up or move down depending on how these numbers look, and also if the clients have sessions scheduled, right? Naturally, she just saw these people within the past 2 weeks. They have sessions scheduled, so can't think too much into these just yet, but some of these that are closer, we have a good idea of where things are going to go. So what I'll do with people, I'll just look at both sides of this. This is where the data is heading. And then at the very top, this is what's going to fall off and no longer be included in the statistic anymore. Does that make sense? And another thing I will look at here, really the final thing I think I'll be able to get to. I know a few of you also mentioned some questions in the chat about cancellations. So I think ultimately the best thing to do is create a system of standardization with how clinicians handle cancellations in order for it to track accurately. And that's a battle that we fight as well. We use therapy notes, and it's kind of that question of how do you handle if somebody cancels? Do you mark it as canceled and then add the new session if they reschedule, or do you just move that altogether? So it can get a little bit wonky on how it's counted. So the best thing to do is just have a conversation practice wide and set a policy of how to handle it if you really want to dive in and make these numbers accurate. But what I'll also do is look at some cancellation data to get an idea of how things have been looking along with what we may can expect. So just this past year, I was looking, I'll need to filter this a little bit more. I was looking at cancellation data and I noticed that last year, last May, we had a very high number of cancellations. Now that's to be expected. May is when schools are getting out. We get a lot of high school and middle school students at the practice. We also get a lot of college kids from the Savannah College of Art and Design. So this is when school's getting out. This is when college is about to wrap up for the year. So we know a lot of people are going to be heading out of town. There's going to be graduation stuff. Vacations are going to start. So I noticed that we had a high number of cancellations. So what I did was brought it up to all of our clinicians in the staff meeting in April and gave them the heads up of, hey, just so you know, May is a high cancellation month. Let's go ahead and be very proactive with our clients. Let's make sure that we are locking down our appointments, making sure that we're confirming those, being forthcoming and getting ahead of any talks about upcoming vacations. That way they don't get by anybody and we can just have all the appropriate conversations. And then this year, we had significantly less cancellations. And we saw significantly more completed sessions. So the proactive conversation, certainly one can assume, helped that number decrease just by giving the clinicians the heads up of, hey, this might be coming. Let's go ahead and have those conversations. And then we can cut down on that number of cancellations. And I think overall, that is about as well-rounded of a snapshot as I can give you of how I use Practice Vital pretty consistently. Again, most of it, all of this stuff I'll look at weekly, but things like the cancellation report or some of the comparing year over year type data, I'll look at maybe once per month. Churn rates, I'll tend to look at once per day just to kind of keep a close eye on everything. That way I can get ahead. If somebody's churn rate is moving in a particular direction, I don't figure it out 3 weeks too late. I can stay pretty on top of it. But yeah, that's pretty much how I use it.
Hunter, there was someone who asked, and I can't remember exactly if you look at this or not, about revenue and how do you use the revenue features in
Yes.
Vital?
Yeah, you might want to speak a little bit more on that one, Whitney, since I think you've been looking at some of the revenue longer than I have. But ultimately, I look at the exact same thing whenever I do look at it, as I'm usually comparing a month from this year to a month from last year to get a good snapshot of kind of our trend and where we're heading. Looking at percentages of growth kind of give me a good idea of, I think that's how I had it looking last. It can give me a good idea of where the year is heading, can kind of help us set goals too. If we expect to grow at this trajectory and we did this much revenue of last year, then how much revenue should we try to shoot for this year? And I don't know if you dive into it in any other areas, Whitney.
No, that's really helpful. And just like a sidebar conversation here, we were looking to hire our second intake person. And as business owners, y'all understand when you start hiring someone who's not actually bringing in revenue, you can kind of freak out and be like, "Oh my gosh, are we going to be able to maintain this person?" And then I got on the phone with Hunter and he like immediately was like, "Yeah, but we're set to have this many sessions this week. It's going in this direction. And I know August is this, but and so it's like all that data he was able to say immediately on the phone that I was like, oh, okay, we can do this." So that's looking at the number of sessions that are scheduled, what August numbers had been, what the revenue had been compared to last year. And so like he had seen, I guess he was showing here about sessions over time. We've noticed that we generally grow by about 20% every year. That's our like, and we can see all that. So then I can make a guesstimate, not that you want to make financial decisions on money you don't have, but you can start making projections like, okay, well, if we're growing by 20%, that tells me that I should be able to hire an intake person because here's what we've been able to bring in as well. So that's really helpful.
What I love about what you both have mentioned and what Hunter you've literally shown us is how you're creating your own internal practice specific benchmarks over time. And, we get that question a lot from folks on, well, what does good look like? Or what is the industry standard or industry benchmark? And obviously we go in there and we have those red, yellow, green thresholds that you can change, and that's based on our research. But truly being able to contextualize the numbers against your own history can be so valuable. And just how you did that, Hunter, with going back to May of 24 to May of 25, like what story does that tell in and of itself? And still you might want to also weigh that against that industry standard, but being able to see growth or setbacks for a practice on a very personal level for your specific team is so valuable when you get the hang of those custom timeframes that you're picking at, or looking at a few. Even maybe it's year to year over year comparison, maybe it's quarter over quarter comparison, and you can kind of start to see that nuanced story take shape instead of just taking a blanket benchmark for the industry as the end all be all, right? And I think that's a valuable takeaway, hopefully for others on the phone too, for how you're naturally learning from the tool.
Well, we can definitely take some questions here. And I see that I've kind of been trying to monitor as well, but a lot of good questions. I'll hit this one that just came, and then I'll just kind of, maybe we can open it up a little more. But what is the value of seeing no-show cancellation rates on this view? It's the session rate. I'm not sure what the question is. What is the value of seeing no-show? Can you speak to that, Zoe?
Sure. It looks like it is the cancellation rate, but I'm just not sure. Like, I know how much our sessions are, so why have it in this view? Like, is this telling me something? Because it just says 180 for like all. Why have it here? I guess I'm wondering. On this view that you have right here.
And I
Well,
think this view is the practice dashboard, right? We're not in cancel report, correct?
Yeah, we're back in the practice dashboard. I think, are you asking just why have that metric altogether since we charge the session rate for it?
Yeah, because I was looking, sorry, it looked like you went somewhere else. So I was looking at the session review, the active clinician comparison. where you see like how much everybody's bringing in. And then when you look at the summary, it had session, no-show, cancel rate, and intake, and like how much each person is bringing in. I just wasn't sure why the line about the no-show, cancel rate was in there. It seems like it kind of doesn't add to what it's telling me, unless I'm missing something, which is possible.
You're back in revenue, is that right? So for
Okay.
average revenue per session, is that the report or revenue report?
It says session revenue, active clinician comparison.
Yeah, so revenue, if you consider, if you're getting revenue from no-shows and late cancels, so you're charging clients a fee for it, we want to include that in our revenue report. So that we know how often that's happening and just, what percentage of our overall revenue is because of late cancellations and no-shows.
Okay, okay, so if they had just one of those, it would show up as, say, the 180 or something. But if they had four, then it'd be the 180 times four, and that's what would show up in that section.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other burning questions that we haven't talked about or answered here?
We always question how to take vacations out of the picture for cancellation rates. How to not be counting that as a cancellation rate.
I don't know what you do, Whitney, but I delete appointments for planned vacation time. I just don't need it in there. And it's, other practices never want to delete an appointment. That's fine, but then account for that in your cancel rate. Maybe adjust your metric thresholds so that they're going to be higher, knowing that you're taking vacation time in there as well.
I actually don't think that's something we've ever talked about as a practice wide, but that's what I do for my own clients as well.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
I will link a
Wait.
support article in here that we have as well, just for some tips on how you might code in your EHR to get kind of streamlined data and just make sure your team is coding things the same way. You don't have to code things the same as all the other practices, but try to code them consistently within your practice so that it doesn't look like somebody has an inflated cancellation rate when really someone else just deleted the appointments and they canceled them all.
And when you guys said, I think a few of you said, yeah, that's how I do it. Which one were you referring to? That deleting them or just changing your percentage expectations?
I delete them.
Okay, we don't delete ours. Okay.
Okay, this is another burning question. If we have time. Transfers. I think we were told you have to put it in the schedule as a CPT code, a transfer code, and we don't know, does it have to go in as a code, a session for the person it's going to in the scheduler, it's therapy notes? Or can anybody, could it be just based on that client? I don't know.
I can take this, Whitney, because I think it's more, some of this relates to more nuance around specific EHRs, specific ways you're coding things in your practice. So there's always going to be kind of differences among everyone. I think what you're referring to is in order to capture retention for a client that transfers to another therapist. Is that what you're talking about? If a client internally transfers from one therapist to another?
To continue, and I guess I thought they weren't even going to be counted. They were going to be sort of lost in space because that new therapist didn't do the intake.
Sure. So generally we say have the new therapist do an intake. You can bill insurance again. I mean, I don't want to get into insurance, recommendations, but most of our practices do have the next therapist do their own assessment because they're a different therapist. They have a different assessment process. They have a different view. So A, that will help revenue wise, and B, it's going to capture them as a new client therapist relationship in terms of retention. If you are unwilling to do that or don't want to for whatever reason, then that's when we recommend you create some kind of service description, or, like maybe you're in therapy notes, you have a 90791, and then the service code or description you write underneath is, transfer client, or, sorry, 90837 transfer, something like that. And then we can pick that up and start a new therapy relationship. So that's a unique, probably more to you question, and not so much something that everyone may be struggling with, but we're happy to kind of talk to you individually about what makes the most sense. Thanks for the question.
I'll also add too that just using Practice Vital, looking at our own data, internal transfers within the practice is not something that we try to do very often. Now we will have, if one of our couples therapists sees a couple, they might send the individuals out to two other therapists at the practice. But as far as an individual internal transfer, we try to avoid that. And just in looking at our Practice Vital data, while it's not something that we do very often, I was able to find that clients who are transferred internally actually tend to churn more often than a client who stays with the same clinician.
It's very cool insight and something you wouldn't know otherwise. So these are the examples of things that we love learning. And I think every practice has so many of their own examples of this, of things that they wanted to search for, they found it. So we love when you share these types of things. Definitely join us in our monthly meetups as well, because this is the kind of discussion we want to have on a monthly regular basis, where people can share their best practices, their use cases, what they've gotten out of it.
And thank you, Whitney and Hunter, for showing a peek inside your world. And I know it's being vulnerable in that sense too, to kind of go through your process and your numbers, and we appreciate that so much. And we're very proud to be in your arsenal of tools as you guys are continuing to grow, and even Whitney and the work you're doing to recommend us to others, and we appreciate that. But hope to continue to help you all find the answers that you need. And again, thank you to Whitney and Hunter for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, we've enjoyed it, the opportunity, and we're always learning something as well. So I'm sure we're going to have some takeaways here. And I put my email, Hunter's email, in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out with any additional questions, and we greatly appreciate it.
Awesome.
Great. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
All right. Thank
So
you.
much.
Hi, everybody.